My name is Abigail Foster and I'm 63 years old. Last night my own son shoved me against the kitchen counter over a cold cup of coffee, leaving bruises blooming across my ribs. The pain throbs with every breath, but it's the betrayal that cuts deeper. Knowing the boy I raised with every ounce of my love now treats me like a stranger he despises. As I stood there clutching the counter to steady myself, he stormed off to his room, slammed the door, and slept soundly, as if breaking his mother's spirit was just another Tuesday. If you've ever felt the sting of someone you love turning against you, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me for stories like mine. You're not alone, and I want you to hear how I found my way out. The morning after, I woke to a body that ached like it had been through a war. My arms were mottled with purple marks, and my lips stung where it had split against my teeth. But the real wound was the shame, knowing my son, Caleb, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, saw me as nothing more than a servant in my own home. I dragged myself to the kitchen at 4:30 a.m. as I did every day to prepare his breakfast. Caleb, 37, sat at the table in his crisp navy suit, scrolling through his phone, not even glancing my way. "Breakfast, Mom, now," he barked, his voice cold as the November air outside. It was as if last night's violence had never happened, as if he hadn't called me a burden, a leech, and threatened to toss me out if I didn't shape up. I scrambled his eggs, 2 yolks, 1 white, exactly as he demanded, paired with rye toast and black coffee, no sugar. 1 misstep, 1 extra grain of salt, and he'd erupt. And when Caleb erupted, I paid the price in bruises. As he ate, the front door clicked open, and in walked his fiancée, Vanessa, her heels tapping like a metronome on the hardwood. She wore a tailored cream coat, her blonde hair sleek and perfect, and flashed a smile that never reached her eyes. "Morning, Abigail," she said, her tone syrupy, reserved for when Caleb was in earshot. "You look tired. Everything okay?" I wanted to scream that her fiancé had left me crumpled on the floor last night, that my back ached from his hands, but I swallowed the truth. "Fine, thank you," I said, forcing a smile. Caleb's eyes flicked to me, a silent warning. "1 wrong word, and you'll regret it." He leaned over, handing me a small bag from a high-end cosmetics store. "I got you this concealer," he said, loud enough for Vanessa to hear. "It'll cover those little marks from your fall last night." Fall, that's what he called it, as if I'd tripped over my own feet and not been slammed into the counter by his rage. The concealer was pricey, $65 I later found out, likely paid for with my own pension, which Caleb had controlled for 2 years. "You're so sweet to her," Vanessa cooed, her eyes gleaming with admiration for the man she thought she knew. If only she saw the monster who whispered threats in my ear when she wasn't looking. As they left for work, Caleb pulled me close, his breath hot against my ear. "Keep your mouth shut, Mom. Tell anyone what happens here and you're done. No one will believe a senile old woman living off her son's generosity." His words landed like stones, heavy and cold. They drove off in his sleek silver SUV, bought with my savings, and I sank into a chair, the silence of the house pressing in. My home, once a haven where I raised Caleb alone after his father walked out, was now a prison. I'd bought this place 35 years ago with my earnings as a medical receptionist at Harper Clinic, pouring every dime into making it ours. Now it was his kingdom and I was the servant. It started 3 years ago when Caleb moved back after a messy breakup. He showed up at my door, eyes red, carrying a duffel bag. "Mom, I'm broke. I just need a place to crash for a bit," he'd said, his voice small, like the boy who used to cling to me during thunderstorms. My heart broke for him and I let him in. "This is your home, Caleb," I said, naive enough to believe we'd rebuild our bond. But slowly the comments began. "This dinner's bland, Mom." "You're letting the house go." "You're embarrassing me in front of Vanessa." Then came the financial control. "You're too old to manage money," he said, convincing me to hand over my bank account. My $400 monthly pension vanished into his control, leaving me with $30 a week for personal expenses. I was a fool, thinking he was protecting me. The violence crept in a year ago, pushes at first, then slaps when dinner wasn't perfect, punches when I moved too slowly. Last night was the worst. I'd brewed his coffee, but it had cooled while he was on a call. "You can't even make coffee, right?" He roared, shoving me so hard I hit the counter, my ribs screaming. "You're nothing but a burden." He spat, his fist grazing my shoulder as I ducked. Vanessa was upstairs, oblivious, and he calmed as quickly as he'd erupted, wiping my tears with a dishcloth. "I'm sorry, Mom, you just need to try harder." Then he slept, while I cleaned my own blood off the floor. As I sat in the kitchen, staring at the concealer, a memory surfaced. My old co-worker, Joyce, who'd retired from Harper Clinic. She'd always said, "Abigail, you're stronger than you know." I hadn't believed her then, but something shifted. I couldn't keep living like this. I grabbed my purse and slipped out to the corner store, where I bought a cheap prepaid phone with my weekly allowance. Back home, I hid it under a loose floorboard in my bedroom, a small act of rebellion. It felt like planting a seed of freedom. The next morning, Caleb's routine was unchanged. Eggs, coffee, silence. Vanessa breezed in, her perfume sharp, and barely acknowledged me. "Abigail, coffee, please." "Decaf," she said, scrolling her phone. As I poured, her eyes lingered on my wrist, where a bruise peeked from my sleeve. She frowned, but said nothing, turning back to her screen. Caleb leaned in as she stepped away. "Lunch today, Mom. Vanessa's bringing colleagues over. Steak, mashed potatoes, red wine, the good stuff. Here's $50. $50 for a gourmet meal for 5? Impossible." But I nodded, knowing defiance meant pain. I went to the market, stretching the money thin. Discount steak, generic wine, potatoes on sale. At the checkout, I ran into my neighbor Helen, a kind woman in her late 50s who'd lost her husband years ago. "Abigail, you look exhausted," she said, her eyes catching the concealer failing to hide my swollen cheek. "Everything okay?" My throat tightened. "Just clumsy," I lied. "Bumped into a door." Helen's gaze softened. "You know my number, Abigail. Call me any time." Her words were a lifeline, but Caleb's threat echoed. "No one will believe you." Back home, I cooked frantically, the house gleaming by noon when Vanessa's colleagues arrived. 3 women in sharp suits, their laughter filling the dining room. "Abigail, this looks divine," Vanessa said, playing the perfect hostess. I served steak, mashed potatoes, and a berry tart I'd stretched the budget to make. As I cleared plates, one guest, a woman named Beatrice with sharp gray eyes, lingered in the kitchen. "You worked at Harper Clinic, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded, surprised. "I was a patient there years ago. You were so kind, organizing my appointments when I was scared. You don't forget people like that." Her words stirred something in me, pride long buried. Beatrice's question caught me off guard. "What do you do now?" she asked. I hesitated. "I take care of the house," I said, avoiding her gaze. Vanessa overheard, chiming in. "Abigail's a godsend. Keeps everything running so Caleb and I can focus on work." Her tone was patronizing, reducing me to a maid. Beatrice raised an eyebrow but didn't press. As they left, she slipped me a business card. "Call me if you ever need to talk," she whispered. I tucked it under the floorboard with the phone, my heart racing. That afternoon, my prepaid phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Foster, this is Dr. Ellis from Harper Clinic. We need to discuss your account. Can you come in at 3 p.m.? My stomach dropped. Caleb managed my finances. What could this be? I slipped out while he was at a meeting, taking the bus to the clinic. Dr. Ellis, a man in his 60s with a calm demeanor, greeted me. "Abigail, we've noticed irregular withdrawals from your health savings account. Over $20,000 in the past year, transferred to an account linked to Caleb." I froze. "I didn't authorize that," I stammered. He showed me statements, transfers dated every month, starting January 2023. "We need your statement to investigate," he said. This could be fraud. Fraud! The word hit like a slap. My son wasn't just hurting me. He was stealing my future. I left the clinic in a daze, the statements tucked in my purse. On the bus, I pulled out Beatrice's card. Beatrice Lang, attorney at law. My hands shook as I dialed her number. Abigail, she answered, her voice steady. I knew something was wrong. Tell me everything. Sitting on a park bench, I poured out the truth. The beatings, the financial control, the fear. Beatrice listened, then said, I'm coming to you. Stay put. An hour later, she sat beside me, her notepad filled with my story. We can file charges for elder abuse and financial fraud, she said. But we need evidence. Do you have anything concrete? I thought of the statements, the phone, the concealer, small proofs of a larger truth. I'll get more, I promised. That night, Caleb came home late, his tie loose, his mood dark. Where were you this afternoon? He snapped. I had a doctor's appointment, I lied, my voice steady. His eyes narrowed. Don't play games, Mom, I checked your phone. You didn't get any calls. My blood ran cold. He'd been monitoring me. Tomorrow you're staying home. Vanessa's got a promotion dinner. Cook something fancy. Don't screw it up. He tossed me $40 and went to bed. I hid the statements under the floorboard, my resolve hardening. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. The next morning, I cooked breakfast in silence, my mind racing. Helen stopped by, her eyes scanning my face. Abigail, I heard yelling last night. You sure you're okay? Caleb was upstairs, but his threat loomed. I'm fine, I whispered, but her frown told me she didn't believe it. I'm here, she said, slipping away. I spent the day preparing for Vanessa's dinner, my hands trembling as I chopped vegetables. At 6 p.m., the doorbell rang. Vanessa and her boss, a woman named Claire. As I served, Claire's gaze lingered on my stiff movements. Abigail, you look familiar, she said. Did you work at Harper Clinic? I nodded, my throat tight. You helped me through my cancer treatment in 2010. I never forgot you. Her kindness was a balm, but Caleb's glare kept me silent. After dinner, Claire pulled me aside. I saw the bruise on your neck, she whispered. Is someone hurting you? My eyes welled up, but before I could answer, Caleb appeared. Everything okay, Mom? He asked, his tone sweet, but his grip on my arm tight. Just catching up, Claire said, her eyes sharp. She handed me her card. Call me. Back in the kitchen, Caleb's mask fell. What did you tell her? He hissed. Nothing, I said, my voice firm. He raised his hand, but the doorbell rang. Helen with a pie. Thought you could use this, she said, her eyes locking on Caleb. He lowered his hand, muttering, nosy neighbors. I saw my chance. That night, I called Beatrice from the prepaid phone. I'm ready, I said. I want to file charges. She arranged for me to meet her at her office the next day. At dawn, I slipped out, leaving a note for Caleb. At the store. At Beatrice's office, I handed over the statements and recounted every bruise, every threat. We'll need more, she said. Can you record him? I nodded, my heart pounding. She gave me a small recorder, showing me how to use it. Be careful, Abigail. He's dangerous. Back home, Caleb was waiting, his face a storm. Where were you? He demanded. The store, I said, holding up a bag of groceries. He grabbed my wrist, twisting. Lie to me again and you're out on the street. This house is half mine. My breath caught. He'd lied about that too. I'm sorry, I mumbled, but inside I was steel. I hid the recorder under my pillow, waiting for his next outburst. It came that night. Dinner was late, my fault, he said. You're useless, he screamed, shoving me against the fridge. The recorder caught every word. Keep your mouth shut, or I'll make sure you lose everything. I've got proof you mishandled clinic funds in 2008. You'll go to prison before me. My heart stopped. In 2008, I'd processed a $5,000 donation for the clinic, logging it as a gift per my boss's orders. I hadn't known it was unreported income. Caleb had found it, weaponizing my past. I sent the recording to Beatrice, who called immediately. This is enough for elder abuse and blackmail, she said. We're filing tomorrow. The next morning I met her at the courthouse, my hands shaking as I signed the complaint. By noon, police arrested Caleb at his office. Vanessa called, her voice trembling. Abigail, what's happening? They took Caleb. I told her the truth, every hit, every theft, She went silent, then whispered, "I saw the bruises. I should have said something." She promised to testify, revealing Caleb had drained her savings too. At Caleb's bail hearing, I faced him. He sat in an orange jumpsuit, his eyes burning with rage. "Mrs. Foster," the judge, a woman with silver hair, asked, "describe your son's actions." I told her everything. The punches, the stolen $20,000, the threats about 2008. The recorder played, Caleb's voice filling the room. "You'll lose everything." The judge's face hardened. Bail denied. Charges include elder abuse, financial fraud, and blackmail. Caleb lunged, shouting, "You'll pay for this, Mom!" Guards restrained him, his threats sealing his fate. Vanessa approached me after. "I'm leaving him," she said, tears streaming. "I found bank statements. He took $15,000 from me. I'll testify." Her betrayal mirrored mine, binding us in shared pain. Beatrice secured my house's deed. It was never in Caleb's name. The clinic offered $30,000 in compensation for my suffering, and Beatrice helped me start a small catering business, using my love of cooking to rebuild. 3 months later, I moved back home. The kitchen, once a battlefield, was mine again. I cooked for myself, the scent of fresh bread filling the air. Caleb sent letters from jail pleading, "Mom, I'm sorry." "I'm your son," I didn't reply. Forgiveness might come, but not yet. Helen visited bringing tea. "You're free," she said. I nodded, feeling the weight of my past lift. A year later, my catering business thrived. I hired a therapist, learning to heal the scars Caleb left. Vanessa, now divorced, became a friend, helping with orders. I stood in my kitchen, the same counter where Caleb's rage had broken me, now a place of creation. Justice isn't revenge. It's reclaiming your life. Have you ever had to break free from someone you loved? Share your story in the comments. I'm listening. And if my story moved you, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like mine, and I'd love for you to hear them.